I had 847 friends the day I decided to delete them all. Let me tell you something about being 62 years old in a world that's figured out how to put loneliness in your pocket and call it connection. My name is Sarah, and 3 years ago, when my husband died, my daughter Jessica handed me an iPhone and said, "Mom, you need to stay connected." What she meant was, "I'm worried about you being alone in that big house, but I live 4 states away and can't call every day." What I heard was, "Here's a device that will make you feel less empty." And for a while, I believed her. I downloaded Facebook, created a profile, and watched as my little world expanded into a universe of notifications, likes, and little red dots that made my heart skip every single time they appeared. Within 6 months, I had 847 friends. Former students who remembered me from 30 years of teaching English at Roosevelt High. Old colleagues from the teacher's lounge who used to share their lunch with me. Distant cousins I'd met once at a funeral in 1987. People from my high school graduating class whom I genuinely could not pick out of a police lineup. Neighbors who lived 6 houses down, whom I'd never actually spoken to, but we were friends now, weren't we? We liked each other's posts. We wished each other happy birthday when Facebook reminded us to. We shared articles about the weather, about politics, about how coffee was both killing us and saving us depending on which study you read. This was friendship in the modern age, and I was good at it. Better than my kids gave me credit for. Better than most people my age, if I'm being honest. My morning routine became sacred. 6:30 a.m., coffee in my favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle that Robert bought me on our anniversary, and I'd settle into the corner of the couch where the light came in just right. Then I'd open Facebook and watch my world come alive. Someone in California was already awake, posting about their sunrise run. Someone in New York was complaining about the subway. Someone right here in town was sharing a recipe for banana bread that they swore was life-changing, though I'd scroll past it and forget it existed 5 seconds later. I'd post my own coffee cup, usually with some inspirational quote I'd found on a website that specialized in inspirational quotes over stock photos. Things like, "Every day is a new beginning," or "Be the change you wish to see," or my personal favorite, "She believed she could, so she did." The likes would start rolling in within minutes. Deborah from book club, though we hadn't actually attended book club together in 2 years. Mark, a former student who was now a lawyer in Chicago. My cousin Diane commented the same thing on every post. "Love this," with 3 heart emojis. This was my community. This was how I stayed relevant. The thing about Facebook is that it makes you feel productive without actually doing anything. I could spend 4 hours scrolling, commenting, sharing, and reacting with the little emoji faces that conveyed exactly how I felt without requiring me to form actual words. And at the end of those 4 hours, I'd feel exhausted. Fulfilled, even. Like I'd had conversations, maintained relationships, and participated in life. Never mind that I'd turned down lunch with Claire, my actual flesh and blood neighbor who'd knocked on my door the week before. I was too busy. Too connected to hundreds of people to make time for one. Can you see the mathematics starting to fail? I couldn't. Not yet. My children worried, in that way that adult children worry about aging parents who aren't actually aging that poorly but also aren't behaving the way the children think they should. Jessica would call on Sundays, and I'd tell her about my week, and it would all be about Facebook. "Did you see what I posted about the farmer's market?" I'd ask. She'd pause, that specific pause that means someone is trying to find kind words for an uncomfortable truth, and she'd say, "Mom, I don't really check Facebook that often. But I'm glad you're engaged with people." Engaged. That was the word. I was engaged. With 847 people who existed primarily as profile pictures and opinion pieces. But I felt like I mattered, you understand? Every notification was proof that I existed. Every like was a small validation that my thoughts, my photos, and my carefully curated life were worth witnessing. When you're a widow living alone in a house that used to hold 4 people during holidays and now holds just you and the ghost of what used to be, validation becomes currency. And I was rich. So rich that I never noticed I was actually bankrupt. The day it happened, I woke up feeling righteous. You know that feeling? When you've read something that makes you feel informed, empowered, and ready to contribute to the discourse? The town council was proposing a new community center, and there was a debate about the location. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. I'd raised my children here. I'd taught half the town's kids how to write a proper 5-paragraph essay. I had opinions, and Facebook had taught me that my opinions mattered. So I wrote what I thought was a thoughtful post. Just my perspective. Just my experience as someone who's been part of this community since before half these people moved here. I talked about property values, about traffic patterns, about what this neighborhood used to be and what it was becoming. I hit share, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and felt that warm glow of civic participation. Within 20 minutes, the first comment appeared. It was from someone named Derek, who I genuinely did not remember friending, and it said, "Maybe you should educate yourself before you speak on things you don't understand." I stared at that sentence, reading it 3 times, trying to understand what I'd said that was so offensive. Trying to remember who Derek was. I clicked on his profile. We had 12 mutual friends. He worked in marketing. He moved to town 4 years ago. And he thought I needed to educate myself. Then came Linda, a former student I'd had in 2003, whom I remembered as a quiet girl who wrote beautiful poetry. Her comment said, "This is exactly the kind of out-of-touch boomer mentality that's holding this community back." Boomer. Like it was an insult. Like the 62 years I'd lived, the experiences I'd accumulated, and the wisdom I thought I'd earned were now reduced to a slur. I felt my chest tighten. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another one, and deleted that too. My hands were shaking now. The coffee was cold. More comments appeared. Someone I'd worked with for 15 years at the school told me I was part of the problem. A neighbor I'd waved to every single morning for the past decade said I needed to think about others for once. Think about others. I'd spent 30 years teaching other people's children. I'd baked casseroles for every funeral, every new baby, and every hard season in this neighborhood. And now I needed to think about others. The comments kept coming. 47 of them in the span of an hour. Some were from people I knew, most from people I didn't. All of them are angry. All of them were certain that I was wrong, that I was harmful, and that my very existence and perspective were something that needed to be corrected. I tried to defend myself. I tried to clarify. I tried to explain that I wasn't saying what they thought I was saying. But the thing about Facebook is that nuance dies in the comments section. Context is murdered by interpretation. And 847 friends means 847 different people who are absolutely certain they know exactly what you meant, even when you're screaming into the void that they don't. I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart, exactly. More like the illusion I'd been carrying. The illusion that these people cared about me. That these relationships were real. That this community was anything more than a performance space where we all pretended to be close while being completely isolated behind our screens. My phone kept buzzing. More comments. More notifications. More people I'd considered friends explaining to me why I was a bad person. I thought about my grandson, Joshua, who was 17 and rarely looked at his phone when we were together, which I'd always found rude. He'd told me once, after I'd posted something he found embarrassing, "Grandma, those aren't real friends. Real friends don't perform their friendship for an audience." I'd laughed at him. What did a teenager know about friendship? I had 847 friends. He had maybe 5 people he actually spent time with. I'd won the numbers game. But sitting there, watching strangers who were technically friends tear apart my character because I'd had an opinion about a community center, I started to wonder if maybe Joshua had understood something I'd been too proud to see. I opened the settings menu. My finger hovered over the words I'd never thought I'd consider. Delete account. Facebook asked me if I was sure. It showed me a collection of photos I'd posted over the years. My garden tomatoes. Robert's last birthday before he got sick. My grandchildren at Christmas. It said, these will all be lost. It said, your friends will miss you. Would they? Would they actually miss me? Or would they just notice the absence of content in their feed for approximately 30 seconds before scrolling to the next thing? I thought about those 847 people. I thought about how many of them had called me after Robert died. Actually called and not commented on my grief post with a sad face emoji. I could count them on 2 hands. I thought about how many of them knew my middle name, my favorite book, and the thing I was most afraid of in the world. None of them. Not one. I thought about how I'd spent 3 years building this digital community while systematically dismantling my actual life. How I'd turned down real invitations to scroll through fake connections. How I'd measured my worth in likes instead of love. My hands were still shaking, but now it was from something else. Don't panic. Something closer to rage. Or maybe clarity disguised as rage. I read through the comments one more time. 47 people who knew nothing about me, explaining who I was. And I realized, if this was friendship, I didn't want it anymore. I clicked delete. Facebook asked me again if I was sure. It reminded me this couldn't be undone. It gave me 30 days to change my mind, to log back in, to restore everything. I confirmed. The screen went blank. The app disappeared. The notifications stopped. And I sat there, in the corner of my couch where the light came in just right, holding my phone that suddenly felt light as air, and I realized something terrifying. I just deleted 847 friends. And I had absolutely no idea if I'd done the bravest thing of my life or the most foolish. The silence that followed was deafening. I kept staring at my phone, at the empty space where the Facebook app used to be. Part of me wanted to reinstall it immediately. Part of me wanted to call Jessica and confess what I'd done, like a child admitting they'd broken something valuable. But mostly I just sat there, feeling the weight of a question I wasn't ready to answer. If I'd just lost all my friends overnight, does that mean they were never really friends at all? And if they weren't, what had I been doing for the past 3 years? What had I been building? What had I become? The next morning, I woke up and reached for my phone out of pure habit, ready to check my notifications, ready to see who needed me, who had liked my posts, and who had commented on my life. But there was nothing. Just a blank home screen and the hollow recognition that nobody was looking for me. Nobody had noticed I was gone. And that's when the real terror set in. So let me ask you something, because I need you to really think about this. How many of your friends would notice if you disappeared tomorrow? Not if you announced you were leaving, not if you made a dramatic exit, but if you simply vanished from their feeds and their screens and their carefully curated digital lives. How many would pick up the phone? How many would knock on your door? How many would wonder where you went? Because I had 847 friends, and in the 3 days after I deleted my account, do you know how many reached out to check on me? None. Not a single one. 3 days of silence taught me something I wasn't prepared to learn. I had no idea who I was when nobody was watching. You need to understand what those first 72 hours felt like. Imagine spending 3 years building a house, brick by brick, room by room, until it's this sprawling mansion that feels like home. Then imagine walking outside one morning and realizing the whole thing was made of fog. That's what it felt like. Every time I picked up my phone, my thumb would move automatically to where the Facebook app used to be, and I'd feel this jolt of panic when I found empty space instead. Phantom limb syndrome, but for social media. My brain had literally rewired itself to expect those little red notifications, and now there was nothing. Just silence. Just me. Just the terrifying reality that I'd deleted 847 people, and not one of them had noticed I was gone. The first morning, I woke up at 6:30 out of habit. Made my coffee. Sat in my corner of the couch where the light came in just right. And then I just sat there, staring at the wall, holding my phone like it was a dead thing. Do you know how long 4 hours actually is when you're not scrolling? It's an eternity. It's a canyon of time that you suddenly have to fill with something, anything, and I had no idea what that something was supposed to be. I tried watching the morning news, but it felt hollow without being able to comment on it, without being able to share my reactions and have people validate that yes, I was right to feel whatever I was feeling. I tried reading a book, one of those mysteries I used to love before Facebook, but I couldn't focus. My brain kept reaching for stimulation, for that dopamine hit of new information, new drama, new anything. 3 pages in, I put it down and picked up my phone again. Opened my email. Nothing but spam. Opened my text messages. One message from my phone carrier telling me about an upgrade opportunity. That was it. That was my entire digital social life without Facebook. I want you to think about something for a moment. When was the last time you spent an entire day without any form of social validation? Without anyone liking something you did, or commenting on something you said, or even just acknowledging that you exist? Because that's what day one felt like. Like I'd ceased to exist. Like I'd stepped out of the matrix of modern life and discovered that outside the matrix, I was nobody. I had no proof of my existence except the fact that my coffee cup was real and my house was real and the silence was so real it felt like a physical presence in the room. By day 2, the panic started to turn into something else. Something darker. I found myself standing in front of my hallway closet at 2 in the afternoon, staring at a shelf where I'd stored old photo albums. Remember photo albums? Physical books filled with physical photographs that existed whether or not anyone liked them? I pulled one down, blew off the dust, and started flipping through pictures of my life before smartphones. There was Robert at our 20th anniversary, his arm around me, both of us laughing at something I can't remember now. There were my kids when they were little, covered in mud from playing in the backyard. There was my mother, who'd been dead for 15 years, holding infant Jessica with this expression of pure wonder on her face. And I realized something that made my chest feel tight. These moments had happened. They'd been real. They'd mattered. And not one of them had needed a single like to prove it. But here's what really got me, what really made me understand the trap I'd been living in. I couldn't remember the last time I'd experienced something without immediately thinking about how I'd post about it. When was the last time I'd seen a sunset and just watched it instead of photographing it? When was the last time I'd cooked a meal for the simple pleasure of eating it instead of for the validation of people telling me it looked delicious? When was the last time I'd existed for myself instead of for an audience? I closed the photo album and looked around my house, really looked at it for the first time in months. There was dust on the bookshelf. The plant in the corner was dying, maybe already dead. The kitchen table where Robert and I used to have breakfast together every morning was covered in junk mail and magazines I'd never read. This house that used to be alive, that used to be filled with conversation and laughter, and the mundane beautiful chaos of family life, had become a backdrop for my digital performance. I'd been living here, but I hadn't been present here. I'd been somewhere else, in that blue-lit world of endless scrolling and manufactured connection, and my real life had quietly withered without me noticing. Day 3 was when I hit rock bottom, though I didn't know it was rock bottom at the time. I thought it was just another day of suffocating silence. I made my coffee, sat in my corner, picked up my phone, put it down, picked it up again. I opened my contacts list and started scrolling through names. How many of these people could I actually call? How many of these numbers were still valid? How many of these relationships had substance beneath the surface? I stopped at Claire's name. Claire, my next-door neighbor. We'd been Facebook friends for 2 years, liked each other's posts, and commented occasionally on photos. But when was the last time we'd actually talked? Really talked face-to-face, voice-to-voice, human-to-human? I couldn't remember. And that scared me more than anything else. My finger hovered over her name. Call her. Something in me whispered. Just call her. But another voice, louder and meaner, said, "What if she doesn't answer? What if she does answer, and you have nothing to say? What if you've forgotten how to have a conversation that isn't performed for an audience? What if you deleted Facebook and discovered that you're not actually an interesting person? You were just good at posting?" I put the phone down. I didn't call Claire. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, drowning in silence, wondering if this was what the rest of my life was going to feel like. But then something happened that I didn't expect. It was small, so small I almost missed it. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring out the window at absolutely nothing, when I noticed a cardinal land on the fence post in my backyard. Bright red and impossible to miss, it just sat there, turning its head, looking around. And I watched it. That's all. I just watched this bird for maybe 2 minutes, maybe longer. I don't know, because I wasn't checking the time. I wasn't thinking about anything except this cardinal, and the way the sunlight caught its feathers. And when it flew away, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Not happiness, exactly. Something quieter than that. Something like presence. Like I'd been there, in that moment, instead of thinking about the next moment, or documenting this moment for future validation. I'd just been there. Present. Real. And that tiny moment cracked something open inside me. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that fixed everything or made the loneliness disappear. But it was a crack, and through that crack came a dangerous question. What if I could learn to be present again? What if I could learn to exist without an audience? I need you to understand how terrifying that question was. Because it meant admitting that I'd spent 3 years of my life performing instead of living. It meant admitting that I'd valued quantity over quality, notifications over conversations, and the appearance of connection over actual intimacy. It meant admitting that I'd let myself become addicted to validation from strangers while neglecting the people who actually mattered. And it meant doing something about it. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that cardinal. About how it didn't need me to photograph it to prove it existed. About how it lived its life completely independent of my witness. And I thought about my 847 friends and how not one of them had reached out. Not one email. Not one text. Not one phone call. 7 days had passed since I deleted my account, and the silence was total. Complete. Devastating. And you know what the worst part was? I couldn't even be angry at them because I knew, deep in my bones, that I'd been exactly the same way. How many of my Facebook friends had I actually reached out to when they went silent? How many times had I noticed someone hadn't posted in a while and actually checked on them instead of just scrolling past their absence? Never. Not once. Because they weren't actually friends. They were content providers. We all were. We were all just providing content for each other's feeds, performing our lives, collecting our likes, and calling it connection. But here's the thing about rock bottom, it's solid ground. And from solid ground, you can start to build something real. On day 8, I did something I hadn't done in years. I woke up, and I didn't reach for my phone. I made my coffee, and I sat in my corner of the couch where the light came in just right, and I looked around for something, anything, that I actually wanted to do. Not something I wanted to post about doing. Not something that would make me look productive or engaged or like I was living my best life. Just something I wanted to do for the simple reason that I wanted to do it. And my eyes landed on a box in the corner of the room. A box I'd been meaning to go through for 6 months but never had because I was too busy scrolling. I opened it. Inside were Robert's things. Things I'd packed away after he died because looking at them hurt too much. His favorite sweater. His reading glasses. A book he'd been halfway through when he got sick. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was something I'd forgotten existed. My old address book. You remember address books? Those little notebooks where people used to write down phone numbers and addresses by hand? This one was falling apart, held together with a rubber band, filled with names written in different colored inks from different years of my life. I opened it carefully, like it was a sacred text, which in a way it was. It was a record of my life before digital. Before friend requests and profile pictures. Before connection became something you could quantify with numbers. These were people I'd chosen to write down, to remember, to keep in my life deliberately and intentionally. I started reading through the names. Some of them I barely remembered. Some of them were surely dead by now. But then I stopped at one name that made my breath catch. Linda. Linda Patterson. My college roommate. My best friend for 4 years of my life. The person who'd held my hair back when I had food poisoning sophomore year. The person who'd been my maid of honor at my wedding. The person I'd lost touch with sometime in the chaos of raising kids and building careers and life happening the way life does. We were Facebook friends. We'd been Facebook friends for 3 years. We liked each other's posts occasionally. We commented, "Miss you," on each other's photos. But when was the last time we'd actually talked? When was the last time I'd heard her voice? I couldn't remember. And that realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd had her available to me, one click away, for 3 years, and I'd reduced our decades-long friendship to the equivalent of waving at someone across a crowded room. My hands were shaking when I picked up the phone. The number in my address book was probably 20 years old. Probably disconnected. Probably useless. But I dialed it anyway because I needed to know. I needed to know if there was anything real left in my life or if I'd let it all evaporate into the digital ether. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. I was about to hang up when someone answered. "Hello?" It was her voice. Older, maybe, a little different, but unmistakably Linda's voice. "Linda?" I said, and my voice cracked on her name. "It's Sarah." There was a pause, and in that pause, I heard confusion, then recognition, then something I wasn't expecting, relief. "Sarah? Oh my God, Sarah! I was just thinking about you. How are you?" And just like that, the dam broke. I started crying. Not delicate tears. Ugly, shoulder-shaking sobs that I couldn't control. And Linda, who I hadn't really talked to in years, who I'd reduced to a Facebook friend, who I'd liked and commented on but never really connected with, Linda did something that 847 people couldn't do. She waited. She let me cry. She didn't try to fix it or rush past it or ask what was wrong. She just stayed on the line, present and patient, until I could breathe again. "I'm sorry," I finally managed to say. "I'm so sorry. I deleted Facebook, and I realized I don't have any real friends anymore, and I found your number, and I thought maybe you'd remember me, and I..." "Stop," Linda said, and her voice was firm but kind. "Stop apologizing. I'm glad you called. I'm so glad you called. Can I tell you something?" I nodded, realized she couldn't see me, and whispered, "Yes. I've thought about calling you 100 times over the past few years," she said. "Every time I saw one of your posts, every time you liked something of mine, I'd think I should call her. We should actually talk. But then I'd get distracted, or I'd think you were probably busy, or I'd convince myself that liking each other's posts was enough. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I miss you, Sarah. Not Facebook. You. Real you." We talked for 3 hours. 3 hours. When was the last time I'd talked to anyone for 3 hours? We caught up on everything. Her divorce that I'd known about from Facebook but hadn't really known about at all. My grief over Robert that I'd posted about but never actually processed with another human being. Her grandchildren. My fears about aging. Her struggles with retirement. My confusion about what my life was supposed to look like now. We laughed. We cried. We reminisced about college parties and terrible boyfriends and the future we'd imagined for ourselves versus the reality we'd gotten. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I realized something crucial. This was what I'd been missing. Not the likes. Not the comments. Not the validation. This real, messy, unfiltered human connection couldn't be performed or curated or reduced to a thumbs-up emoji. When we finally hung up, I felt different. Still lonely, but differently lonely. Still uncertain about what I'd done by deleting Facebook, but less regretful. Because for 3 hours, I'd existed as a full human being in conversation with another full human being, and it had mattered. It had filled something in me that 847 friends had never touched. But here's what I need you to understand. That phone call didn't fix everything. It didn't magically cure my loneliness or validate my decision or give me a roadmap for what came next. Because the next morning, I woke up, and I was still alone in my house. I still had no notifications to check. I still had days and days of empty time stretching out in front of me. And I still had to figure out how to live in the real world when I'd spent 3 years living in a digital one. So I made myself a promise. A small one, because small was all I could manage. I promised myself I'd do one real thing every day. Not one post-worthy thing. Not one thing that would make me look good to an audience. Just one real thing that connected me to the physical world I'd been avoiding. On day 9, I went for a walk around my neighborhood. Not to take pictures of trees. Not to track my steps so I could post about my fitness journey. Just to walk. To move my body. To notice things. And I did notice things. I noticed that the Johnsons 3 houses down had planted new rose bushes. I noticed that someone had left a little free library on the corner, filled with paperback mysteries. I noticed that my neighborhood, which I'd lived in for 30 years, had changed in small ways while I'd been staring at my phone, and I'd missed all of it. On day 10, I went to the library. The actual library, that building I drove past every week but never entered because I could read articles online. I got a library card. The librarian, a woman maybe 10 years younger than me with kind eyes and purple reading glasses, smiled when she handed it to me and said, "Welcome back. Welcome back." Like she could tell I'd been gone somewhere, lost somewhere, and was just now finding my way home. I checked out 3 books. Real books with weight and pages and that particular smell of library books. I brought them home, and I read one of them cover to cover in a single afternoon, something I hadn't done in years, and when I finished, I just sat there holding it, feeling accomplished in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion. On day 11 I baked bread. From scratch. No fancy stand mixer, no bread machine, just flour and water and yeast and my own 2 hands. I kneaded that dough until my shoulders ached, and while I kneaded I cried. I cried for Robert, who used to love my homemade bread. I cried for the 3 years I'd lost to a screen. I cried for the woman I used to be before Facebook taught me that my worth was measured in engagement metrics. And when the bread came out of the oven, golden and perfect and smelling like every good memory I'd ever had, I didn't photograph it. I didn't post about it. I just sliced it and ate it with butter while it was still warm, and it was the best thing I'd tasted in years. But I still felt lonely. That's the part that's hard to explain. I was doing all these real things, reclaiming all these real parts of myself, but the house was still empty. The phone still didn't ring. I still woke up in the middle of the night sometimes, reaching for my phone, looking for that hit of validation, finding nothing. The withdrawal was real. The addiction had been real. And breaking an addiction doesn't mean the craving goes away. It just means you're learning to sit with the craving instead of feeding it. On day 14, I did something that scared me more than anything else I'd done. I walked next door to Claire's house. Remember Claire? My neighbor. My Facebook friend. The person I'd waved to for years but never really talked to. I stood on her porch for a full minute before I knocked, my heart pounding, my mouth dry, feeling like a teenager asking someone to prom. What if she didn't want to talk to me? What if she was busy? What if I'd waited too long and our Facebook friendship was all there was, and I'd ruined even that by deleting my account? But I knocked. And she answered. And when she saw me standing there, her face did something complicated. Surprise, then confusion, then something that looked almost like relief. "Sarah," she said. "Hi. Is everything okay?" "I don't know," I said, which was the most honest thing I'd said to another human being in weeks. "I deleted Facebook 2 weeks ago, and I've realized I don't actually know you. We've been neighbors for how long? 8 years? And I don't know you. I don't know what you do, or what you love, or what your life is like beyond what you post online. And I thought maybe, if you're not too busy, we could have coffee? Just coffee. Just talking?" Claire stared at me for a moment, and I watched her face shift through several emotions I couldn't quite read. Then her eyes filled with tears, and she laughed, and she said, "I deleted Facebook 3 months ago. I've been wanting to knock on your door ever since. We sat at her kitchen table for 4 hours that day. 4 hours. And I learned that Claire's husband had died 18 months ago. That she was struggling with the same crushing loneliness I was struggling with. That she'd been waving at me every morning, hoping I'd stop and talk, but I never did because I was too busy checking my phone. That she tried to reach out on Facebook but felt like everything she posted was fake, like she was pretending to be okay when she wasn't, and eventually she deleted her account because the performance was killing her. We'd been living 30 feet apart, both drowning in grief and loneliness, both waving at each other across the chasm of our front yards, and neither of us had known the other needed help because we were too busy maintaining our digital personas. "Why didn't you just knock on my door?" I asked her. She gave me a sad smile. "Why didn't you knock on mine?" And there it was. The truth. We'd been so trained to believe that connection happened through screens, that reaching out meant sending a message or liking a post, that we'd forgotten how to simply cross the distance between us and knock on each other's doors. We'd forgotten how to be neighbors, how to be friends, how to be human beings who needed other human beings. Claire and I made a pact that day. Every Tuesday, we'd have coffee. Real coffee, in real kitchens, with real conversation. No phones. No distractions. Just two women who'd spent too long being lonely, deciding to be less lonely together. And that was the beginning of something I hadn't expected. That was the beginning of rebuilding a life that wasn't measured in likes and shares and comments. A life that was measured in Tuesday morning coffees and homemade bread and conversations that lasted until the light changed and we realized hours had passed without us noticing. But here's the question that kept me awake at night, the question I couldn't shake no matter how many real connections I started to rebuild. Was it enough? Could 7 real relationships replace 847 digital ones? Could quality really triumph over quantity when quantity had felt so validating, so powerful, so proof that I mattered? Because there was still a part of me, a part one was ashamed to admit existed, that missed it. That missed the notifications and the likes and the constant hum of validation. That missed feeling of being part of something bigger, even if that something was just an algorithm designed to keep me scrolling. 3 weeks after I deleted Facebook, I got an email. It was from Facebook itself, and the subject line said, "Your friends miss you." My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The email showed me thumbnails of recent posts from people I'd been friends with. Sarah had gotten a new dog. Mark had been promoted. Someone I didn't even remember friending had gotten married. And at the bottom of the email, in friendly blue text it said, "Your account can still be recovered. Just click here to log back in. Just click here." That's all it would take. One click and I could have it all back. All 847 people. All the noise and the validation and the proof that I existed in the eyes of others. One click and I wouldn't have to do the hard work of building real relationships. I wouldn't have to feel the discomfort of silence. I wouldn't have to sit with the reality that I'd spent 3 years avoiding my actual life. I stared at that email for 20 minutes. My mouse is hovering over the link. My heart is racing. My mind running through all the justifications. It wouldn't hurt to just check. I could use it differently this time. I could be more intentional. I could keep the good parts and avoid the bad parts. I could have my 847 friends back and also keep Claire and Linda and the real connections I was building. I could have both, couldn't I? But then I thought about something Linda had said during our phone call. She'd said, "The thing about Facebook is it lets you believe you're connected while actually keeping you isolated. It's a magic trick. It shows you hundreds of faces while hiding the fact that you're alone in a room, staring at a screen, surrounded by silence." I closed the email. I didn't click the link. But I didn't delete the email either. I kept it. Because I needed to know that the temptation was real, that the addiction was real, and that this wasn't going to be easy or clean or simple. I needed to know that choosing reality over performance was a choice I'd have to keep making, over and over, probably for the rest of my life. And that scared me. Because what if I wasn't strong enough? What if the loneliness became too much? What if I built this new life, this real life, and it still wasn't enough to fill the void that Robert left behind? What if I'd made a terrible mistake? What if I'd deleted 847 friends and discovered that I was just as alone as I'd always been? Only now I didn't even have the illusion of connection to comfort me. What would you do, sitting at that crossroads? Would you click that link? Would you go back to the warm, familiar glow of constant validation? Or would you sit with the discomfort of rebuilding from scratch, not knowing if what you're building will ever be enough? Because that's where I was. Standing at the edge of something, not knowing if I was about to step forward into a new life or backward into the old one. And the email was still there, waiting, one click away. So what do you do when the thing you deleted keeps calling you back? That email sat in my inbox for 3 days. Unopened, but not deleted. A constant reminder that I was one click away from returning to the familiar comfort of 847 friends and the warm glow of validation. I'd wake up in the morning, make my coffee, sit in my corner of the couch where the light came in just right, and I'd think about that email. About how easy it would be to just peek, just check in, just see what everyone was doing. I could tell myself I was stronger now. That I'd learned my lesson. That I could go back and use Facebook differently, intentionally, the way those productivity gurus always talked about being mindful with technology. I could have both worlds, couldn't I? The real connections I was building with Claire and Linda, and the digital community I'd spent 3 years cultivating? But every time I thought about clicking that link, I'd remember something my grandson Joshua had said to me once, back when I was deep in my Facebook addiction and didn't even know it. He'd been maybe 16 at the time, sitting at my kitchen table doing homework while I scrolled through my feed, and he looked up at me and said, "Grandma, why do you care so much what strangers think?" And I'd gotten defensive, the way we do when someone touches a truth we're not ready to face, and I'd said, "They're not strangers, Josh. They're my friends." And he'd given me this look, this sad, knowing look that was too old for his teenage face, and he'd said, "Are they though? Like if you needed help moving furniture, how many of them would show up?" I'd laughed it off. Told him he didn't understand. That friendship looked different for my generation. That we stayed connected in ways he couldn't appreciate because he was too young to understand. But sitting there, 3 weeks after deleting my account, with that email burning a hole in my inbox, I realized Joshua had understood something I'd been too proud to see. He'd asked the right question, and I'd spent 3 years refusing to answer it. On day 22, I deleted the email. Not because I was certain I had made the right choice. Not because the temptation had disappeared or because I felt strong and healed and ready to face the world without Facebook. I deleted it because I realized that keeping it there was like keeping a bottle of wine in the house when you're trying to quit drinking. The temptation doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you exhausted from constantly resisting. So I deleted it. And then I sat there, waiting to feel relief or regret or something definitive that would tell me I'd done the right thing. But all I felt was tired. Tired of fighting with myself. Tired of questioning every decision. Tired of trying to figure out if I was brave or foolish or just a 62-year-old woman who'd made an impulsive choice and was now too stubborn to admit it might have been a mistake. But here's what happened next, and this is the part one need you to really hear because it's the part that changed everything. The day after I deleted that email, I went for my morning walk around the neighborhood. It was early October, and the air had that crisp quality that makes you feel alive in a way summer never does. I was walking past the community center, the same community center that had been the subject of my controversial Facebook post, the post that had triggered the comment section massacre that had led to me deleting my account in the first place. And I saw a sign on the door. "Volunteers needed for Fall Festival Planning Committee." I stopped and stared at that sign. Before Facebook, I used to volunteer. I used to be the person who showed up to planning committees and bake sales and community events. I used to participate in my actual community, not just comment on articles about community participation. When had I stopped? When had I replaced showing up with posting about showing up? I stood there for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe longer, having a conversation with myself that probably looked crazy to anyone driving past. Part of me wanted to walk away. Wanted to go home to my safe, quiet house where nobody could judge me or misunderstand me or reduce me to a caricature in a comment section. But another part of me, the part that was slowly waking up after 3 years of digital sleep, whispered something different. This part said, "What if the reason those 847 people felt so disposable is because you were disposable to them too? What if real community, the kind that actually matters, is built by people who show up in person, who do the work, who exist in the same physical space and deal with all the messy complications that come with actual human proximity? What if you've been trying to build a life from a safe distance, and that's exactly why it never felt real?" So I walked through those doors. And let me tell you, walking into that community center was harder than deleting Facebook. Because deleting Facebook was impulsive, done in a moment of pain and anger. But walking into that community center was a choice. A deliberate choice to be visible, to be vulnerable, to risk being judged or rejected or misunderstood in a way that mattered because it was happening in real life with real consequences. The room was full of people I didn't know. Well, that's not entirely true. I recognized some faces. Neighbors I'd seen around. Parents of former students. People I probably could have talked to dozens of times over the years but never had because I was always too busy staring at my phone. There was an older woman, maybe 70, with silver hair and paint-stained fingers, setting up folding chairs. There was a man about my age wearing a volunteer coordinator name tag. There was a young woman, couldn't have been more than 30, typing something on a laptop. "Can I help you?" the man with the name tag asked. His name tag said, "Richard." And I almost said no. Almost turned around and walked right back out. Almost retreated to my safe, lonely house. But instead I heard myself say, "I saw the sign. About volunteers. I'd like to help." Richard's face broke into this genuine smile, not the performative smile people give you when they're being polite, but the real kind that reaches the eyes and makes you feel seen. "We absolutely need help," he said. "Have you ever planned a community festival before?" I thought about all the years I'd been a teacher, all the school events I'd organized, and all the coordination and chaos and problem-solving that had been such a huge part of my life before retirement, and widowhood and Facebook had erased that version of me. "Yes," I said. "I have." And just like that, I was part of something again. Not a Facebook group. Not a digital community. A real, messy, complicated, face-to-face community where people showed up with their coffee breath and their bad moods and their genuine laughter, and their willingness to work alongside strangers who might become friends. We met every Tuesday evening for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of arguing about whether we should have a petting zoo or if that was too cliched. 6 weeks of taste-testing pies for the baking contest. 6 weeks of dealing with permits and budgets, and the guy who thought we should have a live band but didn't want to help book the band. It was exhausting and frustrating and occasionally made me want to quit. But it was real. And somewhere in the middle of all that realness, something happened that I didn't expect. I made friends. Not 847 friends. Not even 87 friends. But 5 people who I actually knew. Catherine, the woman with the paint-stained fingers, who was a retired art teacher and who invited me to her studio one Saturday to paint together. James, who lost his wife 2 years ago and understood the specific loneliness of widowhood in a way nobody else in my life did. Maria, the young woman with the laptop, who was new to town and desperately trying to build community in a way that felt authentic instead of algorithmic. Richard, who'd been volunteering at the community center for 15 years and knew everyone and everything about this town. And David, who was terrible at planning but showed up every week anyway because he believed in the work. These 5 people slowly became part of the architecture of my life. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that felt like I was replacing what I'd lost when I deleted Facebook. But in a way that felt sustainable. Real. Like we were building something that could last because it was built on showing up instead of scrolling. But I'd be lying if I said there weren't moments when I missed it. The Facebook version of friendship. The ease of it. The way you could feel connected without having to navigate the complicated reality of other people's needs and schedules and bad days. There's something seductive about digital friendship. It lets you be there when you want to be there and disappear when you don't. It lets you curate your presence, control your image, and decide exactly how much of yourself you want to share. Real friendship doesn't give you that luxury. Real friendship means showing up on Tuesday evenings even when you're tired. It means listening to Catherine talk about her grandchildren for 45 minutes even though you'd rather be home reading your book. It means being there for James when he's having a hard day even though his grief makes you uncomfortable because it reminds you of your own. Real friendship is work. And I'd spent 3 years avoiding that work by convincing myself that liking posts and leaving comments was the same thing. One evening, about 2 months after I'd started volunteering, Maria asked me a question that caught me off guard. We were cleaning up after a planning meeting, stacking chairs and sweeping floors, and she said, "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" I nodded, curious and slightly nervous. "Do you have social media?" she asked. "I tried to friend you on Facebook but couldn't find you." I stopped sweeping and looked at her. This young woman, 30 years younger than me, whom I'd been slowly building a friendship with through real conversations and shared work, wanted to add me on Facebook. And I had to explain that I'd deleted it. That I'd had an account and lost it in a moment of crisis and decided not to go back. I waited for her judgment. For her to look at me like I was one of those out-of-touch older people who didn't understand modern life. But instead, she looked at me with something that looked like envy. "I wish I could do that," she said quietly. "Delete it all. Sometimes I spend hours scrolling, and I feel like I'm watching other people live their lives while mine just sits here, waiting for me to pay attention to it. But I can't quit. Everyone's on there. All my friends, my family, everyone. If I delete it, I'll disappear." And I realized something in that moment. Something crucial. Maria was 30 years old, had grown up with social media, and was supposed to be a digital native who understood this world better than I ever could. But she was just as trapped as I'd been. Maybe more trapped, because she couldn't even imagine an alternative. She thought Facebook was mandatory. That connection only existed through screens. That disappearing from the feed meant disappearing from life itself. And maybe that would have been true if she hadn't been standing there in a community center, cleaning up after a meeting with people she'd met in person, building the exact kind of real-world community she thought was impossible. "You didn't disappear," I told her, gesturing around the room at the evidence of real people doing real work together. "You're here. That's the opposite of disappearing." She looked around, and I watched something shift in her face. Recognition, maybe? Or possibility. "How do you stay in touch with people?" she asked. "Like, how do you know what everyone's doing?" "I call them," I said. "Or I see them. We have coffee. We make plans. It's slower than scrolling through a feed, but it's also more intentional. I know less about more people, but I know more about the people who actually matter." Maria nodded slowly, like I'd said something profound. But really it was just the obvious truth that we'd all forgotten in our rush to collect friends instead of cultivating friendships. We finished cleaning in silence. But it was the good kind of silence. The kind where both people are thinking about the same thing and don't need to fill the space with words. The fall festival was a success. 200 people showed up. There was a petting zoo after all, and Catherine's art students did face painting, and James ran the pie contest, and Maria coordinated the volunteer schedule like a pro, and Richard gave a speech about community that made 3 people cry. And I stood there, in the middle of all that noise and chaos and genuine human connection, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, though I was happy. Not pride, though I was proud of what we built together. What I felt was present. Grounded. Real. Like I existed in 3 dimensions instead of 2. Like I was participating in my life instead of documenting it. After the festival, we all went out for drinks. The 5 of us, plus a few other volunteers who'd become part of our little group. We squeezed into a booth at the local bar, the kind of bar that's been there forever and smells like beer and wood polish and nostalgia. And we talked. For hours. About the festival, about our lives, about everything and nothing. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, Catherine looked at me and said, "Sarah, how did we not know each other before this? You've lived here for 30 years. I've lived here for 20 years. How is this the first time we're really talking?" And I could have blamed it on busy lives or different circles or just the way things happen. But instead I told her the truth. "I was on Facebook," I said. "I thought I was connected to everyone, so I didn't bother connecting with anyone." The table went quiet. Then James started laughing, and Maria joined in, and soon we were all laughing at the absurdity of it. The way we'd all been so busy maintaining our digital presence that we'd neglected our actual presence. The way we'd confused performance with participation. The way we'd let algorithms convince us that connection was something that happened through screens instead of something that happened when people showed up in the same place at the same time and did something together. "I'm still on Facebook," Catherine admitted. "I post my paintings. I like people's posts. But I'm not sure I have any actual friends on there." "Does that sound terrible?" "No," I said. "It sounds honest." And that became our thing, our little group. Radical honesty. We started meeting every Thursday for what we called analog nights. No phones. No social media. Just conversation and board games and sometimes silence when we ran out of things to say but didn't want to go home yet. Those Thursday nights became the highlight of my week. More than the Tuesday coffees with Claire, more than the Sunday phone calls with Linda, more than anything else, those Thursday nights reminded me what friendship was supposed to feel like. Reciprocal. Messy. Real. But here's what I need you to understand about quitting Facebook. It didn't fix everything. It didn't cure my loneliness or heal my grief or magically transform me into someone who had it all figured out. I still had hard days. Days when I woke up and felt the crushing weight of Robert's absence. Days when I missed my kids so much it physically hurt. Days when I wanted to reach for my phone and scroll until the feelings went away. The difference was, now I had to actually feel those feelings. I couldn't numb them with the constant stream of other people's lives. I couldn't distract myself with outrage or inspiration or the comfortable blur of endless content. I had to sit with my grief and my loneliness and my fear that maybe I'd wasted the past 3 years and maybe I'd never get them back. 3 months after deleting Facebook, I went to visit my daughter Jessica. She lived 4 states away, and we'd been doing the obligatory Sunday phone calls, but this was the first time I'd seen her in person since I'd deleted my account. She picked me up from the airport, and the first thing she said, after hugging me, was, "Mom, you look different." "Different how?" I asked. She studied my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "I don't know." "More here? Is that weird to say? Like you're more present or something?" And I realized that was exactly what had changed. I was more present. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. I wasn't constantly half somewhere else, half scrolling through my feed, and half thinking about what I'd post later. I was just here, fully here, in whatever moment I was in. That night, we had dinner at her house. My son-in-law cooked, and my grandson Joshua, now 17 and devastatingly perceptive, asked me the question I'd been both dreading and hoping someone would ask. "Grandma, did you really delete Facebook?" I nodded. "I did." "Why?" And I could have given him the simple answer. Could have said it was toxic or time-consuming or bad for my mental health. But I wanted to give him the real answer, the complicated truth that had taken me months to understand. "Because I realized I was performing my life instead of living it," I said. "Because I had 847 friends and 0 people who actually knew me. Because I was so busy documenting moments that I wasn't experiencing them. Because I forgot what it felt like to be bored, to be present, to exist without an audience. Because I looked up one day and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just because I wanted to do it, not because it would make a good post. Does that make sense?" Joshua looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "Yeah, that makes sense." My therapist told me I should delete Instagram for basically the same reasons. But I can't. All my friends are on there. Are they though? I asked, echoing his question to me from years ago. Like if you needed help moving furniture, how many of them would show up? He laughed, surprised that I'd remembered. Touché, Grandma. Touché. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Jessica found me sitting in her living room, looking at old photo albums she'd pulled out. Physical albums, the kind I'd made before the digital age, convinced us that photos only mattered if they were shared online. There was Robert and me on our wedding day, impossibly young and impossibly hopeful. There were my kids as babies, toddlers, and teenagers. There were my mother, my father, and people who were gone now but who'd been so vitally present in these captured moments. And Jessica sat down next to me and put her head on my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a child, and she said, "I'm glad you deleted it, Mom. I was worried about you. You seemed lost." "I was lost," I said. "I'm still kind of lost. But I'm finding my way back." To what? To myself, I think. To the version of me that exists without an audience. To the person I was before I started measuring my worth in likes and comments and shares. Jessica was quiet for a moment, then she said something that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. "I miss Dad too, Mom. Every day. And I think maybe Facebook was your way of not feeling how much you miss him. But avoiding the feeling doesn't make it go away. It just makes it last longer." She was right. Of course she was right. I'd spent 3 years avoiding my grief by filling every silent moment with digital noise. And now that the noise was gone, I had to actually face what I'd been running from. Robert was gone. My life as I'd known it was gone. My identity as a wife and a teacher and a busy person with purpose was gone. And I'd been trying to build a new identity through Facebook, through the appearance of being connected and engaged and relevant. But appearances don't heal grief. Connection does. Real, messy, complicated, in-person connection with people who see you and know you and show up anyway. I stayed with Jessica for a week, and during that week, something shifted between us. Without Facebook as a barrier, without me being distracted by my phone every 5 minutes, we actually talked. Really talked. About her marriage, her career, and her fears about the future. About my loneliness, my struggle with retirement, and my confusion about what my life was supposed to look like now. We cried together. We laughed together. We cooked dinner together without documenting it. We took walks without photographing them. We existed together in real time, without the buffer of screens and the performance of connection. And when I left, when I hugged her goodbye at the airport, she whispered in my ear, "Thank you for coming back to us, Mom." Coming back to us. That's what I'd been doing. Not just deleting Facebook, but coming back to the people who actually mattered. Coming back to myself. Coming back to the world that existed outside the screen. And it was hard, harder than I'd ever imagined, but it was also worth it in ways I couldn't have predicted. 6 months after deleting Facebook, I woke up on a Tuesday morning, made my coffee, and sat in my corner of the couch where the light came in just right, and I realized something profound. I wasn't reaching for my phone. I wasn't looking for validation or distraction or proof that I existed. I was just sitting there, drinking my coffee, watching the light change, and being present in my own life. And it felt like peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, even if what you're doing is just sitting in silence with yourself. That same week, Claire and I started a walking group. Just us and 3 other neighbors who'd been lonely too but hadn't known how to reach out. We walked every morning at 7, rain or shine, talking or not talking, just being present with each other. That walking group became my new morning routine, and it was better than scrolling. Better because it was real. Because my body was moving and my lungs were breathing and my friends were right there beside me instead of on a screen. Catherine invited me to join a watercolor class she was teaching. I hadn't painted since college, but I showed up anyway, and I was terrible at it. But it didn't matter because I wasn't trying to be good at it for anyone else's approval. I was just trying to be good at it for myself. James and I started going to a grief counseling group together. Sitting in a circle with other widows and widowers, sharing our stories, crying with people who understood the specific hell of losing your person. It was uncomfortable and painful and exactly what I needed. Maria asked me to mentor her as she started a business. She wanted to leave her corporate job and do something meaningful, and somehow she'd decided I was wise enough to help her figure out what that meant. I didn't feel wise. I felt like I was still figuring everything out myself. But I showed up for our monthly coffee meetings, and I listened, and I asked questions, and I realized that maybe wisdom wasn't about having all the answers. Maybe it was just about being present enough to ask the right questions. My analog Thursday night group expanded to include new people. Friends of friends. Neighbors. People who heard about this weird group of people who got together without their phones and wanted to see what that was like. Sometimes we had 15 people crammed into someone's living room, playing charades and arguing about politics and laughing until our stomachs hurt. And I'd look around at these faces, these real faces with their imperfections and their genuine expressions and their physical presence, and I'd think about my 847 Facebook friends, and I'd feel nothing. Not anger. Not regret. Just nothing. Because they'd never been real. They'd been avatars. Placeholders. The illusion of community without the substance. But here's the thing about real community, about real friendship, about real life: it's inconvenient. It requires showing up when you don't feel like it. It requires navigating other people's moods and needs and drama. It requires being vulnerable and imperfect and sometimes wrong. It requires work. Constant, ongoing, unglamorous work. And there's no reward system. No one likes to quantify your effort. No comments to validate your feelings. No shares to prove you matter. You just have to trust that showing up is enough. That being present is enough. That real connection, the kind that happens slowly over months and years of consistent presence, is worth more than the instant gratification of 1,000 likes. 1 year after I deleted Facebook, I threw a party. A real party in my real house, with real food and real music and real people. I invited everyone who'd become part of my life in that year. Claire and the walking group. Catherine and the painting class. James and the grief counseling group. Maria and her new business partners. Richard and the community center volunteers. My Thursday night analog group. Linda, who flew in from out of state. Jessica and her family, who drove 4 states to be there. 37 people came to my house that day. 37 people who knew me. Not Facebook me. Real me. They knew how I took my coffee. They knew what made me laugh. They knew about Robert and my grief and my struggle to build a life that felt meaningful after loss. They showed up not because an algorithm told them to, not because I'd invited them through a Facebook event, but because we'd built something real together. Because I'd knocked on their doors and they'd knocked on mine. Because we'd shown up for each other, consistently, imperfectly, persistently. At one point during the party, I stood in my kitchen, watching these people fill my house with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of real human connection, and I thought about that day 1 year ago when I'd sat in this same kitchen, staring at my phone, my hands shaking, reading 47 comments from people who thought they knew me well enough to tear me apart. And I thought about how I'd made that impulsive choice to delete everything, how terrified I'd been, and how certain I was that I'd made a terrible mistake. And I realized, it hadn't been a mistake. It had been the best decision I'd made in years. Maybe in my entire life. Because it had forced me to build something real. Not perfect. Not easy. Not without loneliness or struggle or moments of doubt. But real. Solid. Substantial. The kind of life that could hold weight. Joshua found me in the kitchen and he said, "This is cool, Grandma. Like, actually cool. Not just phone says it's cool, but actually cool." "You think so?" I asked. "Yeah. Everyone's actually talking to each other, not just pretending to talk while checking their phones. It's like, I don't know. It feels real. That's because it is real, I said. He nodded, looking around the room with something that looked like longing. I think I'm going to delete Instagram, he said. Not forever, maybe. But for a while. To see what happens. What do you think will happen? I don't know. Maybe I'll be bored. Maybe I'll be lonely. Maybe I'll realize I don't actually have as many friends as I think I do. He paused. Or maybe I'll figure out who my real friends are, the ones who show up without an algorithm telling them to. Maybe, I said. Want to know what I learned? Yeah. The real ones? There aren't as many of them. But they matter more. The math works out differently than you expect. 7 real friends are worth more than 847 fake ones. Quality over quantity isn't just something people say. It's actually true. Joshua looked at his phone, then looked back at me. Okay, he said. I'm going to do it. Right now. Delete it. Will you stay on the phone with me while I do? In case I freak out? And that's exactly what we did. We walked out to the backyard, away from the party, and I held his hand while he deleted Instagram. And he didn't freak out. He just stood there, staring at his phone, and then he looked up at the sky like he was seeing it for the first time, and he said, "Huh. The world's still here. The world's still here." I agreed. And so are you. We went back inside, and the party continued for hours. People stayed until late, until my house was a mess of empty plates and wine glasses and the beautiful debris of real community. And after everyone left, after I'd said goodbye to the last guest and closed the door and stood in my quiet house surrounded by evidence that life had happened here, I didn't feel lonely. I felt tired, yes. Overwhelmed by the cleanup ahead of me, yes. But not lonely. Because loneliness isn't about being alone. Loneliness is about feeling disconnected from the people around you. And I was connected now. Really connected. To people who knew my middle name and my favorite book and the thing I was most afraid of in the world. To people who showed up. Who knocked on my door. Who sat with me in silence when there were no words. To people who were real. And here's what I want you to know, what I need you to really hear. I'm not telling you this story to convince you to delete Facebook or Instagram or whatever platform you're using to convince yourself you're connected when you're actually isolated. I'm not anti-technology. I'm not saying social media is evil, or that everyone who uses it is living a lie. Some people probably can use it in healthy, balanced, intentional ways. But I couldn't. And if you're listening to this story and feeling that uncomfortable recognition in your chest, that sense that maybe, possibly, you've been doing the same thing I was doing, performing your life instead of living it, collecting friends instead of cultivating friendships, measuring your worth in metrics instead of in the depth of your real relationships, then maybe you need to ask yourself the questions I had to ask myself. How many of your friends would notice if you disappeared tomorrow? How many would pick up the phone? How many would knock on your door? How many actually know you, the real you, not the curated version you present online? When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to do it, not because it would make a good post? When was the last time you were bored? When was the last time you sat in silence with yourself and didn't immediately reach for distraction? When was the last time you were fully present in a moment, not thinking about how you'd document it later? I'm not saying the answers to these questions will be easy or comfortable. They weren't for me. But I am saying they're worth asking. Because the alternative is spending your life performing for an audience that doesn't actually care, collecting likes from people who don't actually know you, and building a community that evaporates the moment you stop posting. And life is too short and too precious and too real to spend it in the digital shadows. So here's what I want you to do. Not right now, not this second, but sometime soon when you're brave enough. I want you to look at your friends list, your followers, your connections, or whatever your platform calls them. And I want you to ask yourself, how many of these people do I actually know? How many would I call if I needed help? How many would I want to spend a Tuesday evening with, no phones, just conversation? And then I want you to look at that number, that real number of people who matter, and I want you to ask yourself, Am I giving them my time and attention and presence? Or am I giving that to the hundreds or thousands of people who are essentially strangers? Because here's the truth I learned. You can't maintain 847 real friendships. It's not possible. The human brain isn't wired for it. We're wired for small communities, for deep connections, and for quality over quantity. And when we try to maintain hundreds of shallow connections, we end up maintaining 0 deep ones. We end up alone in a crowd, isolated while appearing connected, performing community while experiencing isolation. I'm not saying delete everything tomorrow. I'm not saying throw your phone in a lake and move to a cabin in the woods and reject modernity entirely. But I am saying, pay attention. Notice how you feel when you're scrolling. Notice if you're reaching for your phone to connect or to avoid. Notice if your relationships are reciprocal or performative. Notice if you're living your life or documenting it. Notice if you're present or if you're always half somewhere else. And if you don't like what you notice, change it. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just start showing up more. Calling more. Being present more. Choosing quality over quantity. Choosing real connection over the appearance of connection. Start with one person. One real person who matters to you. Call them. Not text. Call. Ask them how they're really doing. Not in a casual way, but in a way that invites real honesty. Listen to their answer. Really listen, without thinking about what you'll say next or checking your phone while they talk. Show up for them. Knock on their door. Invite them to coffee. Build something real, even if it's just one relationship, one genuine connection that isn't mediated by a screen. And then do it again with another person. And another. Slowly rebuild your life with real connection instead of digital approximation. It's slower. It's harder. It's less immediately gratifying. But it's real. And real is what we're all craving, even if we don't realize it. Real is what we're searching for every time we scroll, every time we post, and every time we check our notifications, hoping that this time, this like, this comment will finally fill the void. But it won't. The void can only be filled by real connection. By showing up. By being present. By choosing quality over quantity. By being brave enough to knock on someone's door and risk them not answering. So I want you to do something for me right now. I want you to think of one person. One real person who matters to you. Someone you've been meaning to reach out to but haven't because you've been too busy or too distracted or too convinced that liking their posts counts as staying connected. Got someone in mind? Good. Now here's what I want you to do, before you watch another video, before you scroll to the next thing, before you forget about this story and move on with your digital life. I want you to contact that person. Not tomorrow. Not when you have time. Right now. Call them. Text them and ask when you can talk. Make plans to see them in person. Do something real. Build something that matters. Choose connection over performance. Choose quality over quantity. Choose to show up. Because here's what I know now, what I learned from deleting 847 friends and building 7 real relationships. The math works out differently than we've been taught to believe. One real friend is worth more than 100 shallow connections. One Tuesday morning coffee is worth more than 1,000 likes. One person who knows your middle name and your favorite book and the thing you're most afraid of is worth more than an audience of strangers who think they know you because they follow your feed. You don't need 847 friends. You never did. What you need is a handful of people who show up. Who knocks on your door. Who sits with you in silence when there are no words. Who knows you, the real you, and chooses you anyway. That's what matters. That's what lasts. That's what fills the void. So tell me, who are you going to call? Who are you going to choose? Who are you going to show up for? Don't just think about it. Don't just plan to do it later. Do it now. Because right now is all we have. Right now is where life happens. Not in the feed. Not in the comments. Not in the likes and shares and the endless scroll. Life happens when you put down your phone and look up. When you knock on someone's door. When you show up. when you choose to be present instead of performing presence. I'm Sarah. I'm 63 years old. I had 847 friends and I deleted them all overnight. And it was the best decision I ever made. Not because I'm against technology or social media or staying connected, but because I realized that connection isn't something that happens through a screen. It's something that happens when you're brave enough to show up in person, vulnerable enough to be seen, and persistent enough to keep showing up even when it's hard. So here's my challenge to you, and I really want you to do this. Pause this video right now. Go to the comments section below. Don't just scroll past and forget this story. Actually participate. Tell me, how many real friends do you have? Not followers. Not connections. Real friends who know your middle name, who would show up if you needed help moving furniture, who you'd want to spend a Tuesday evening with, no phones allowed. Write that number down in the comments. Just the number. Be honest. And then, if you're brave enough, tell me one thing you're going to do differently after hearing this story. One real action you're going to take to build real connection instead of digital approximation. And if this story resonated with you, if you felt that uncomfortable recognition in your chest, share it. Not on Facebook where it'll get lost in the algorithm. Share it with one specific person who needs to hear it. Text them the link. Call them and talk about it. Use this story as a bridge to have a real conversation about connection and loneliness, and the ways we've been performing our lives instead of living them. Because stories only matter if they change something. And change only happens when we do something different. So do something different. Right now. Choose one person. Make the call. Send the text. Knock on the door. Build something real. That's how we change. That's how we heal. That's how we find our way back to each other in a world that's designed to keep us isolated while appearing connected. I'm Sarah, and this is my story. Now go write yours. The real version. The one that happens when you look up from the screen and choose to be present in your actual life with the actual people who actually matter. Do it now. Do it before you forget. Do it before you scroll to the next thing. Your real life is waiting. And trust me, it's better than anything you'll find on a screen. Go. Call someone. Right now. I'll wait.